The two masked men thought they had picked an easy target, a lone trucker refueling his rig at sunset. Guns drawn, they demanded his keys, certain he'd comply. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. The grizzled man in the worn leather jacket wasn't just any driver. He was a former Navy SEAL, and he wasn't about to give up without a fight. Before we continue, have you ever heard of a trucker fighting back against criminals? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible real-life stories of courage. The sun dipped low over the open highway, casting long shadows across the truck stop parking lot. The air was thick with the scent of diesel fuel and hot asphalt, mingling with the distant aroma of grilled burgers from a roadside diner. A few rigs were scattered across the lot, their drivers either grabbing a meal or catching a few hours of sleep before hitting the road again. The evening was quiet, the kind of peaceful lull that made the long stretches of highway feel almost serene. Inside his truck, Jake Holloway adjusted his worn leather jacket and checked his rearview mirrors. A veteran trucker, Jake had spent decades navigating the roads, hauling loads from one end of the country to the other. But before his life behind the wheel, he had lived another life, one of precision, discipline, and combat. As a former Navy SEAL, he had seen war zones, infiltrated enemy compounds, and faced dangers far greater than anything the open road could throw at him. Most people saw a weathered trucker with sharp blue eyes and a quiet demeanor. But those who looked closer would recognize the unmistakable aura of a man who had faced the worst the world had to offer, and survived. Tonight, Jake was parked in a quiet corner of the truck stop, sipping black coffee from an old thermos. His long-haul route was mapped out, and he was about to turn in for a few hours of sleep before pushing on. The truck's massive chrome exterior gleamed under the truck stop's flickering lights, its reinforced doors and specialized locks a testament to Jake's meticulous nature. He never took unnecessary risks. Even though he was far from the battles he once fought, old instincts never faded. As he reached for his logbook to record his hours, a movement near the edge of the lot caught his eye. 3 men in dark hoodies lingered near the parked trucks, their faces partially obscured by shadows. They weren't truckers, Jake could tell by the way they moved. There was no casual exhaustion of a long hauler stretching his legs, no idle conversation about upcoming routes. These men were watching, waiting. Jake set his thermos down and let out a slow breath. He had seen this play out before. Truck hijackings weren't unheard of, especially for independent drivers hauling valuable cargo. A quick, silent approach, overwhelming force, and before a driver even knew what was happening, his truck and everything inside was gone. Sometimes the criminals were just opportunists looking for easy money. Other times they were part of something much bigger, cartel-funded operations, organized theft rings that knew exactly what they were doing. Jake didn't believe in coincidences. The truck stop was nearly empty, and these guys weren't here by accident. His grip tightened on the old combat knife strapped to his belt. Outside, the men moved closer, their hushed voices carrying across the lot. One of them gestured toward Jake's truck, and the other 2 nodded, glancing around to make sure they weren't being watched. They thought they had picked an easy target, a lone trucker, isolated, unaware. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Jake let a slow smile creep across his face. The night had just taken an interesting turn. Jake Holloway didn't panic. He had faced worse threats in his time: ambushes in the dead of night, enemy combatants creeping through dense jungle, firefights where hesitation meant death. 3 low-level criminals trying to steal his rig. That was just another Tuesday. He watched them through the side mirror as they approached, moving like a pack of wolves circling their prey. One of them, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, tapped a gloved fist against the truck's door. Another, stocky with a heavy jacket that likely concealed a weapon, positioned himself near the driver's side step. The third, their lookout, stayed back, scanning the lot for any witnesses. Jake exhaled slowly. He could handle this without drawing too much attention, but he needed to do it right. "Hey, driver," Scarface called out. "You in there?" Jake made no immediate move to respond. Instead, he reached beneath his seat, feeling the cold metal of his sidearm. He had no intention of using it unless absolutely necessary. This was a truck stop, not a battlefield. But he had learned long ago that being prepared was the difference between walking away and being carried away. Scarface knocked harder. "Come on, man. We just want to talk." "Yeah, sure you do," Jake thought. He slid his hand over to the lock, clicking it open loud enough for them to hear. The men exchanged glances. They thought they had him now. Scarface grinned and yanked the door open. "All right, old man." That was his first mistake. Jake moved fast, lightning fast. He grabbed Scarface's wrist and twisted hard, wrenching it back at an unnatural angle. The man yelped in pain as Jake yanked him forward, slamming his forehead into the edge of the truck's door frame. The impact was sickening, and Scarface crumpled onto the ground. The stocky man lunged, reaching for something inside his jacket. Jake didn't give him the chance. He launched himself from the truck, driving his elbow into the man's sternum. The guy let out a choked gasp and stumbled backward. But before he could recover, Jake grabbed him by the front of his jacket and sent him crashing into the side of the truck with a brutal thud. The third man, the lookout, hesitated. He hadn't expected resistance, much less from a trucker who moved like a trained operator. His hand twitched toward his waistband. "Don't," Jake warned, his voice deadly calm. The man froze. Scarface groaned on the pavement, clutching his broken nose. The stocky man wheezed, barely able to stand. Jake leveled his gaze at the remaining man. "Turn around," he ordered, "and walk away." The man hesitated for a second too long. Jake took a step forward and that was enough. The lookout turned on his heel and ran. Jake rolled his shoulders, adjusting his jacket. "Bad idea," he muttered, stepping over Scarface's moaning form. They had chosen the wrong trucker. Jake stood over the two downed carjackers, his pulse steady, his instincts razor-sharp. The third man had run, but that didn't mean the fight was over. He knew guys like these, desperate, unpredictable. Scarface groaned, trying to push himself up. Blood dripped from his nose onto the pavement, but there was something else in his eyes. Defiance. He wasn't done yet. Jake took a step forward, towering over him. "Stay down." His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a command, one that had been drilled into men far tougher than this wannabe thug. Scarface spat onto the ground, his breath ragged. "You got no idea who you're messing with, old man." Jake smirked. "That's funny. I was about to say the same thing." Then he heard it. Footsteps, coming fast. Jake turned just in time to see the lookout, who had bolted moments ago, coming back with two more men. Reinforcements. One of them carried a metal pipe, the other had something worse, a knife. So, they weren't just some two-bit carjackers. They were organized, at least enough to have backup nearby. That changed things. Jake exhaled slowly, his mind shifting into a familiar state. Calculated precision. Total control. This was no longer a scuffle. This was a threat. And in his world, threats had to be neutralized. The man with the knife grinned as he approached. "Truckers don't usually fight back," he said, flipping the blade in his hand. "You should have just given us the keys." Jake didn't respond. He was already reading their movements, predicting their next steps. The one with the pipe would swing first, try to disable him with brute force. The knife wielder would come in after, go for a quick and messy finish. They didn't realize he had already decided how this would end. The pipe came first, whistling through the air toward his ribs. Jake moved. A quick sidestep, a pivot, and he caught the attacker's wrist, twisting it hard enough to make the pipe drop with a loud clang. In the same fluid motion, he drove his knee into the man's gut, sending him staggering backward. Knife Man hesitated, but only for a second. He lunged. Jake was faster. He grabbed the thug's wrist mid-strike, twisting the blade away. One sharp elbow to the jaw sent the man sprawling. The knife clattered to the pavement. And just like that, the fight had turned. Jake stood amidst the fallen men, his breath steady, his eyes locked onto Scarface. "Still think this was a good idea?" Scarface staggered to his feet, his face twisted in pain and fury. His reinforcements lay groaning on the ground, their weapons scattered, their confidence shattered. Jake stood unmoving, his eyes locked onto the last standing threat. But Scarface wasn't done. With a sudden lunge, he reached into his jacket and yanked out a pistol. A cheap, black Glock, scratched up and well used. Probably stolen. His hand shook slightly, but he held it steady enough, pointing it straight at Jake's chest. The air in the truck stop parking lot shifted. A hush fell over everything. The groaning men on the ground went silent. Even the far-off hum of a passing semi felt distant, irrelevant. Jake exhaled slowly. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice calm, unwavering. Scarface's finger tightened on the trigger. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice was laced with anger. "You're screwing up something way bigger than you. We weren't just after your truck, old man. We were sent." Jake's brow furrowed. "Sent? That wasn't normal for some low-life carjackers." "Sent by who?" Scarface chuckled, shaking his head. "Like I'd tell you." Jake's mind worked fast. This wasn't a random attack. They hadn't just picked his truck at random. Someone wanted this rig specifically. That meant one thing. There was something inside it that someone wanted badly. And that meant Jake had been set up. His thoughts clicked together like puzzle pieces. He had picked up his last haul at a remote loading dock in Texas. No paperwork, just a simple direct payment and instructions to deliver the shipment to a warehouse in Nevada. Seemed odd at the time, but nothing he hadn't seen before. Now he knew. They weren't after him. They were after the cargo. Scarface smirked, seeing the realization dawn on Jake's face. "That's right," he said. "You got something we need. And trust me, you don't want to be in the way of it." Jake glanced toward his truck. What the hell was in that trailer? Guns? Drugs? Something worse? Didn't matter. He had no intention of handing it over. Scarface steadied the gun. "Last chance, old man. Walk away." Jake sighed. "Yeah, I don't do that." Before Scarface could react, Jake moved. A flick of his wrist sent a handful of dirt, kicked up during the scuffle, straight into Scarface's eyes. The thug yelped, instinctively jerking back, the gun wavering for a split second. That was all Jake needed. He lunged forward, grabbing Scarface's wrist in a vice grip, twisting it sharply. The gun fired, a wild shot that sailed harmlessly into the night sky. Jake slammed his elbow into Scarface's jaw, sending the man sprawling to the pavement, the gun skidding out of reach. Jake kicked it away before pinning the gasping thug to the ground. "Talk," Jake ordered, his knee pressing against Scarface's chest. "Who sent you? What's in my truck?" Scarface coughed, his bravado slipping. "You're already dead, man," he wheezed. "You just don't know it yet." Jake glanced around. The truck stop was still quiet. Too quiet. Something wasn't right. And then, a car's headlights flared to life at the edge of the lot. The rumble of an engine followed, and within seconds the vehicle peeled out of the shadows, tires screeching as it sped toward them. Jake barely had time to react before the black SUV was barreling straight at him. Jake had mere seconds to react. The SUV's headlights blinded him, the roaring engine drowning out the groans of the fallen carjackers. Scarface coughed beneath him, still pinned, but Jake knew he had no time to waste. He pushed off the thug, rolling out of the way just as the SUV swerved hard to avoid running over its own man. The vehicle skidded to a halt, doors swinging open, more men, more guns. Jake's mind raced. He was outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmatched. Not yet. Scarface, gasping for breath, scrambled toward the SUV, one of the newcomers helping him up. "Shoot him!" he barked, his voice ragged from pain. "Shoot him now!" One of the men raised a pistol, but before he could take aim, Jake reacted. He dove toward the fallen handgun he had kicked away earlier, his fingers closing around the grip. A single, well-placed shot rang out. The SUV's windshield cracked as the driver yelped, ducking behind the wheel. The man who had raised his gun stumbled back, clutching his shoulder where Jake's bullet had found its mark. Panic spread through the group. None of them had expected a simple trucker to fight like this. Jake used the moment of hesitation to move. He sprinted to his rig, his boots pounding against the pavement. He knew the only way out was through. The moment he reached the driver's seat, he turned the ignition. The truck roared to life. Scarface shouted something unintelligible, but Jake didn't care. He slammed his foot on the gas, yanking the wheel hard to the left. The massive 18-wheeler lurched forward, barreling toward the SUV and forcing the remaining carjackers to scatter. The crunch of metal rang through the night as Jake's truck clipped the side of the SUV, sending it spinning into a ditch. The remaining men scrambled, realizing that this job had gone sideways, fast. Jake didn't stop. He sped out of the truck stop, adrenaline pumping. He needed distance, needed time to figure out what was in that trailer. Miles passed in a blur, the road stretching ahead, dark and empty. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. He needed answers. Finally, when he was sure he wasn't being followed, Jake pulled off onto an empty service road. He climbed down from the cab and walked to the trailer. The lock was intact. Whoever had set this up hadn't expected him to check. With a deep breath, he unlocked the doors and swung them open. What he saw made his blood run cold. It wasn't drugs, it wasn't weapons. It was people. A dozen men and women, wide-eyed, malnourished, huddled together in fear. Trafficking victims. Jake felt his stomach twist. Now he understood. Whoever had set this up had expected him to be another oblivious driver moving illegal cargo. They hadn't counted on him being a man with a conscience. One of the captives, a woman with a tear-streaked face, whispered, "Please, help us." Jake nodded. "I will." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. No more running, no more wondering. It was time to put an end to this. As he waited for the authorities, he leaned against his rig, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just a lucky escape. This was fate. And Jake knew, whatever happened next, he was ready for it.